15 Russian generals stood on a frozen runway, laughing at one African soldier in an oversized flight suit. His name, Ibrahim Traoré. His request, to pilot Russia's most advanced fighter jet, alone. They called it a joke, a formality, a moment to entertain a foreign guest from a minor nation. But 7 minutes after takeoff, not a single word came out of their mouths. What they expected to be a crash turned into a spectacle. What began as mockery became history written in the sky. Loop by loop, trail by trail. He didn't just fly, he drew Africa above Moscow. And in that moment, power didn't wear a medal. It wore defiance, precision, and dignity. Now let me be clear, what you're about to hear is not a documentary. It's a dramatized retelling, a fictionalized story. But the emotions, the injustice, the need to be seen and respected, those are very real. And in a world that still judges by skin, accent, and origin, sometimes we need a story that breaks the rules to tell a deeper truth. So buckle up, because this is not just a flight. This is a reckoning. The Moscow sky looked like it had forgotten the sun. Thick, low-hanging clouds pressed down like the weight of history itself. Colorless, silent, uninviting. A bitter wind swept across the tarmac of the Zhukovsky military airbase, slicing through overcoats and curling under collars like a whispered warning. At the far end of the runway, a modest gray aircraft, unmarked except for the tiny flag of Burkina Faso near its tail, rolled to a quiet stop. No entourage, no ceremonial band, just a small diplomatic crew and one man stepping onto foreign soil with the calm of someone used to being underestimated. Ibrahim Traoré descended the metal steps slowly, deliberately. No fanfare, no overreactions. His posture was upright, composed, his face unreadable beneath the soft, cold breath escaping his lips. His coat wasn't tailored for the Moscow chill, but he didn't flinch. A subtle statement, barely visible, but unmistakably present. At the receiving line stood President Vladimir Putin, flanked by a row of high-ranking Russian military officials, each decorated in heavy uniforms, glittering with medals, polished boots clicking on the icy ground. Their eyes scanned Traoré not like he was a guest, but like a curiosity, an outsider, a puzzle they had already solved before it began. Putin extended a hand. "Welcome to Russia, Comrade Traoré," he said in a tone that teetered between formality and faint amusement. "We've prepared a few toys for you to admire." The Russian generals chuckled softly, some not even trying to hide their smirks. The translator began to repeat the words in French, but Ibrahim gently raised a hand. "Merci," he replied directly, "but I understood perfectly." A subtle pause rippled through the receiving line. One of the generals, General Lavau, known for his blunt tongue, glanced sideways at another and muttered something in Russian that Ibrahim couldn't quite catch. Or perhaps he could. He didn't show it. He only smiled faintly and took in his surroundings. Behind him, the runway stretched like an endless strip of steel. Around him, warplanes sat hunched like sleeping predators, cold, metallic beasts of war, silently watching. He'd seen air bases before, trained in several. Lived through ones without electricity, without radar, without food. This was different. Not because it was more powerful, but because it believed itself untouchable. The motorcade was brief, black sedans with tinted windows cutting through the Moscow outskirts like sharks beneath ice. Ibrahim sat in silence, his gloved hands resting on a thin dossier of the day's agenda. His security detail, 2 lean men from Ouagadougou, sat alert but calm. One of them whispered, "They're watching your every breath." "Good," Ibrahim said, eyes fixed on the blur of Soviet-era buildings sliding past the windows. "Let them watch. Let them measure." At the Kremlin gates, there were more soldiers than needed. Symbolism, projection, fear wrapped in protocol. As Ibrahim stepped out of the car, a ceremonial officer began listing off Russian military achievements. World's largest arsenal, 5th-generation aircraft, hypersonic missile range. The words hung in the air like the smoke from old battles. He didn't respond, not with awe, not even with polite interest, just listening, Weighing. Inside the Kremlin's hall, chandeliers sparkled above like frozen thunder. Every detail screamed of empire. Marble floors, gold leaf on the walls, ancient maps of war and conquest. A curated message. You are small here. Putin walked beside him now, tone cool and rehearsed. We understand Burkina Faso has had its challenges. Perhaps we can help guide your progress. There it was, the line between offer and insult. Traoré met his eyes for the first time and smiled. Slow, polite, unblinking. We've had many challenges, he said, and each one has taught us not to mistake size for strength. Putin didn't react immediately. He simply turned and gestured down a hallway. Let's begin the tour. I believe the Sukhoi 35 is ready for your viewing. And just like that, the stage was set. But Ibrahim wasn't here to admire Russian hardware. He was here for something else entirely, something no one in that room saw coming. And the sky was about to witness it first. The hallway smelled faintly of metal polish and aged marble, like a museum that still believed it was a battlefield. Ibrahim walked beside President Putin through a labyrinth of corridors that felt less like offices and more like monuments to power. Ornate frames housed old Soviet military portraits. Glass cases displayed medals that had outlived the men who earned them. A long corridor led them into a private wing of the military complex, where the real show would begin. Waiting inside was a small army of uniformed engineers and generals, their faces solemn but expectant, like priests unveiling sacred relics. One of them, a burly general with cold blue eyes and a voice like crushed gravel, gestured toward the center of the room where a massive 3D digital display rotated slowly. The Sukhoi 35, he announced, 5th generation superiority, 30-degree thrust vectoring, radar invisibility. You won't find this flying over Africa. Some of the younger officers smirked at the last line. Ibrahim said nothing. He stepped forward, hands behind his back, and watched the animation of the jet spinning silently in midair. The display zoomed into a missile bay, then to the cockpit layout, then the avionics suite. One of the Russian engineers, eager to show off, launched into a rapid explanation of the flight systems. The language was technical, dense, almost deliberately so. Ibrahim nodded occasionally, his gaze fixed. Then he spoke. Are you still using the K-77M variant for mid-range targeting? The engineer blinked. The room felt just a little quieter. Yes, we are, he replied cautiously, but I'm surprised you're familiar with the designation. Some of our regional partners acquired similar platforms, Ibrahim said casually, eyes still on the jet's mock-up. I've seen your heat signature suppression system before, but I thought you had retired that version after the Red Sea engagement in 2021. Seems you've revised it instead. Now even the older generals turned their heads. There was a flicker of reassessment, small but visible. The tour continued, moving past unmanned drone prototypes, electromagnetic shielding concepts, and long-range anti-air batteries. At every station, Ibrahim asked questions. Not the usual polite inquiries of a foreign dignitary, but the precise, unsettling questions of someone who knew where to look. When they reached the satellite tracking interface, he stepped forward and pointed to a calibration protocol. Still using the dual-phase scrambling layer? He asked. The technician hesitated. Yes, but that isn't publicly documented. It was discussed briefly at the Pan-African Defense Summit, Ibrahim replied, finally allowing himself a thin smile, though perhaps not by those who knew what they were discussing. Putin, walking just behind him, said nothing, but his expression had shifted slightly. Less amusement, more curiosity. The final stop of the tour brought them outside onto a secured tarmac where 3 Sukhoi 35s stood under a steel awning like sleeping dragons. Their wings gleamed under the gray light, engines silent but undeniably powerful. One of the jets had a stylized red falcon painted on the tail. A colonel walked alongside the group, proudly narrating the specs again. Speed, stealth, precision, kill radius. Ibrahim listened silently. Then quietly he asked, how do you handle vector drift at high-altitude tight rolls? Your earlier generation had a tendency to slip just past 28,000 feet. The J-10C corrected for that, with gyroscopic input overlays. The colonel froze for half a second, the kind of pause that happens when someone realizes they're not speaking to a tourist. "That is classified data," he finally said. Ibrahim simply nodded. So it was fixed. The silence that followed was different from before. Not the awkwardness of arrogance, but the disquiet of revelation. A realization that the man they were trying to impress had come not to be impressed, but to understand. Not to observe, but to measure. Putin stepped forward once more, brushing off the tension with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We've given you much to consider," he said smoothly. Ibrahim turned, face calm, gaze steady. "Yes," he replied, "but it's not what's displayed that matters. It's what's assumed I won't notice." And with that, he walked ahead, leaving behind a row of men who, for the first time since his arrival, didn't quite know how to respond. The wind had stilled, or maybe it only seemed that way because the moment had narrowed, tightened, as if the very air around them sensed something was shifting. The final stop of the tour placed them face to face with the Sukhoi 35 in its full majesty. Sleek, angular, painted in matte gray with sharp black accents, like a blade forged in shadow. The jet towered silently on the tarmac, its cockpit open, its body humming faintly from recent diagnostics. It looked more alive than mechanical, more predator than aircraft. Putin moved closer to it, eyes gleaming with proprietary pride. He turned to Ibrahim, arms lightly crossed, voice casual, but a little too loud, just enough to invite the attention of the others nearby. "You ever flown one of these?" he asked, tilting his head toward the jet like a man offering a toy he doesn't expect you to understand. The words hovered in the air for a beat, casual but loaded, part challenge, part dismissal, and all theater. Ibrahim glanced at the aircraft, then back at Putin. His answer was quiet, almost too quiet. "No," he said, "but I can." The silence snapped. First came a sharp exhale from one general, then a full-bodied laugh from another. Within seconds, the entire group was chuckling, some politely, others openly. One even clapped lightly, like applauding a clever line in a play. The laughter wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was the laughter of certainty, of men who had decided that what was just said belonged to the realm of absurdity, not reality. Putin smiled, lips curving, but eyes untouched. "Ah," he said, "confidence. I respect that." Ibrahim didn't move. He didn't laugh. His face remained composed, his shoulders squared. Not stiff, but settled, grounded. He looked not at the men, but at the jet. Not as if he wanted it, but as if he already understood it. An aide stepped forward with an amused expression. "Mr. President," he said in Russian to Putin, "perhaps we should show him the simulator room. Might be safer for everyone involved." More laughter, but it was fading now, and something colder was sliding into the atmosphere. Some of the younger officers had stopped smiling. One of the engineers, the same one who had been caught off guard earlier, watched Ibrahim a little too long, as if reconsidering a first impression he hadn't realized he was making. Ibrahim finally turned back to face the group. He didn't respond to the laughter, didn't defend his words. Instead, he simply offered a small, inscrutable smile. The kind of smile that doesn't chase approval, only marks time. "There are many ways to measure a man," he said softly, "but laughter is rarely the most accurate one." The words didn't land like a blow. They didn't need to. They were a scalpel, not a hammer, sharp, quiet, and surgical. Putin tilted his head slightly, no longer amused, not yet intrigued. Just watching. The wind picked up again, brushing the edges of coats, tugging lightly at Ibrahim's collar as if inviting the moment to shift. It would, but not yet. Not until the sky itself had something to say. And Ibrahim, patient as ever, simply smiled and waited. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead like captive constellations, casting fractured rainbows over a banquet table so long it seemed to vanish into the gilded shadows of the Kremlin's St. George Hall. Linen the color of untouched snow draped the oak. Silver candelabras hissed, their flames trembling in the faint draft of centuries-old corridors. The scent of roasted venison, black truffle, and sweet pomegranate glaze mingled with a subtler aroma. Confidence steeped in power. Ibrahim Traoré, seated 3 chairs from President Putin, noted every curated detail. The porcelain stamped with Romanov crests, the string quartet folding Tchaikovsky into the air, the discreet placement of uniformed guards at each arched doorway. Diplomatic theater at its most polished. Crystal goblets brimmed with an amber Georgian wine reputed to have been ransomed from a private cellar. Attendants refilled each glass the instant the men in epaulets set them down, as if thirst itself were a state secret. A toast rang out. General Lavaux, the gravel-voiced pilot who had chuckled loudest on the tarmac, rose, gold braid flashing. "To cooperation," he declared, pronunciation sharp as the metals on his chest. He glanced at Ibrahim with a half-smile that didn't quite hide the gleam of skepticism. "And to the opportunities our Russian technology might unlock for nations still finding their footing?" Polite laughter rippled. Ibrahim lifted the rim of his goblet, but only long enough for the candlelight to skate across the surface of the untouched water inside. He set it down without drinking. Across the table, a young colonel leaned toward a diplomat and whispered, too softly for words to carry, but loudly enough for intention to travel, that their guest must be unaccustomed to vintages finer than millet beer. The diplomat smirked, swirling his glass in lazy circles that released ribbons of oak and plum into the air. Conversation spilled forward, each remark lacquered with poise yet edged with something sharper. One minister extolled Moscow's hypersonic program, concluding with the observation that doctrinal sophistication is often a luxury of geography. Another reminisced nostalgically about Afghan airstrips, where pilots learned the hard difference between ambition and capability. Subtext slithered beneath every syllable. What you come from defines how far you can go. Ibrahim listened. He tasted none of the dishes, only tapping them with his fork as though testing for resonance. When directly addressed, he replied in measured French, lilted English, never defensive, never deferential. His restraint unsettled more than an argument would have. At last, Putin, relaxed by the glow of chandeliers and confidence, turned to him. "Mr. President," he said, raising his glass, "you have been impressively silent. Surely you find our little demonstration of hospitality persuasive?" Forks paused mid-air. Even the quartet softened to pianissimo. Ibrahim folded his hands, the cuffs of his plain suit brushing linen embroidered with double-headed eagles. He inhaled once, allowing the hush to deepen. "Persuasion," he said quietly, "is a current you feel before you see, like undertow beneath calm water." He let the metaphor linger. But true power, he looked from Putin's face to the glint of chandeliers, then down the length of the endless table, does not announce itself, it reveals itself. The words fell gently, yet sounded heavier than any toast that night. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then an aide cleared his throat too quickly, and crystal chimed as several guests shifted, disguising surprise beneath the clatter of cutlery. Putin's smile thinned, becoming calculation. "And have you felt such a current here in Moscow?" Ibrahim lifted his water, regarding the clear surface as if reading a map. "Currents, Mr. President, flow both ways. One must step into them to know their direction." He sipped. Only water, yet it seemed to steady the room around him. Across the hall, a servant removed an untouched wine glass. Puzzled, the string quartet swelled again, but the melody felt altered, uncertain, like sight-reading unfamiliar notes. Lavaux studied Ibrahim now with narrowed eyes, their earlier amusement drained away, replaced by something perilously close to respect. The banquet resumed, but conversation ran slower, as though everyone had become suddenly aware of hidden depths beneath the polished surface. Between spoon taps and soft baritone laughter, Russian officials stole glances at the silent man from West Africa, who drank nothing stronger than water, yet had somehow diluted the evening's certainty. When dessert arrived, honey cake sculpted into the shape of a gilded double-headed eagle, Ibrahim merely nodded appreciation, tracing one fingertip along the plate's rim. He did not need sugar to taste the moment. He had already planted a seed of doubt, small but alive, in the fertile ground of their pride. And seeds, he knew, had a way of revealing themselves, often when least expected and most inconvenient. The quartet reached its final cadence. Candelabra flames leaned and fluttered, as if bowing to something unseen. Ibrahim set down his fork, untouched cake still pristine, and offered the faintest smile, quiet, knowing, patient. The smile of a man who understands that the loudest room will one day fall silent if you give it reason to listen. The morning air at the base was sharper than the day before, laced with frost and expectation. A low fog clung to the concrete like breath held too long, and above it, the silver belly of a Sukhoi 35 gleamed faintly in the rising light. The jet sat idle, its canopy closed, wings folded slightly inward like a hawk at rest. Nearby, ground crews moved briskly, pretending not to notice the dark-skinned figure approaching from the operations building with steady steps and eyes that missed nothing. Ibrahim Traoré was early, earlier than protocol required, earlier than the military attachés had anticipated. Clad in a tailored black overcoat and plain boots that contrasted starkly with the ornate uniforms around him, he moved as if he belonged, not as a guest, but as something more difficult to define. Inside the command room, where coffee steamed and orders moved on hushed lips, his presence drew immediate tension. Maps lit up one wall, telemetry data the next. Generals stood loosely clustered in a half circle, some clasping hands behind their backs, others nursing quiet amusement. General Laveau, flanked by two Air Force colonels, raised an eyebrow as Ibrahim entered. "I'd like to fly the Sukhoi today," Ibrahim said without preamble. His tone was calm, conversational even, but it carried the weight of someone unafraid of being denied. There was a pause. One colonel cleared his throat too loudly. Another exchanged a glance with a junior officer who didn't bother hiding his grin. General Laveau smiled, the kind of smile that usually precedes an insult wrapped in protocol. "Ah, Mr. President," he said, drawing out the title with theatrical politeness. "The request is appreciated. However, flying a fifth-generation combat jet is not as simple as asking for the keys to a Jeep." He chuckled. A few others did too. The room seemed to exhale, tension replaced by condescension. Putin, who had entered quietly from a side door, said nothing. He observed, arms crossed, letting the moment unfold. One of his advisors leaned toward him and murmured, "He's serious." A Russian air marshal stepped forward, hands open in diplomatic appeasement. "We do have a state-of-the-art flight simulator," he offered. "Identical controls, full motion rig, real-time scenarios. Very immersive. Perhaps a demonstration would interest our guest?" Ibrahim's face didn't change. Not a flicker. He looked at the marshal as if regarding a chessboard, already 10 moves ahead. Then he spoke. "Why is the real always withheld?" he asked softly, "and the illusion so generously offered?" The question landed like a quiet detonation. No raised voice, no accusation, just a calm dismantling of the room's assumed superiority. The marshal blinked. Laveau's smile thinned. Putin raised an eyebrow, intrigued now, but still silent. Ibrahim continued, his tone still even. "You show me your power. I see it. I respect it. But when I ask to touch it, you place it behind glass and tell me to pretend. Why?" Silence spread again, this time heavier. The room had shifted. The laughter had stopped. A low hum of electronics filled the background, steady and indifferent. Putin finally stepped forward, voice measured. "These jets cost millions. They are not toys. If something goes wrong—" "I understand," Ibrahim interrupted gently. "Responsibility is part of command. I'm not here for spectacle. I'm here for understanding." Another pause, a long one. Then Laveau spoke again, more slowly. "You've flown jets before, yes?" Ibrahim nodded once. "Yes, but not one of yours. Yet." There was a flicker of uncertainty in the general's eyes now. The kind that appears when someone realizes they've lost the upper hand and aren't sure when it happened. Putin turned to his advisors. They were already whispering, already calculating. Risk, optics, headlines, control. Letting him into the cockpit would be unorthodox, dangerous, but denying him might be worse. Ibrahim said nothing more. He didn't plead, didn't argue. He simply stood there, the embodiment of poised resolve, and waited for men in medals to make a decision about power. Who owns it? who controls it, and what happens when someone refuses to accept the version offered behind glass. And outside, beneath a pale Russian sky, the jet waited too. The conference room was sealed, windows frosted from the inside, the air dense with cigarette smoke and impatience. A half-drunk carafe of black coffee sat ignored in the center of the oval table, ringed by advisors, defense ministers, and high-ranking officers who had spent the better part of the last 20 minutes arguing in controlled voices about what to do with the request no one had expected. A foreign president, a soldier, yes, but not one of them, had asked to take the controls of Russia's most advanced fighter jet, alone. Not in a simulator, not as a guest, as a pilot. "It's reckless," one aide hissed, tapping his pen against a folder marked Confidentiel Militaire. "He crashes it. We're on every headline in the West. Russia humiliates African president." Or worse, Russia endangers foreign head of state. "Do we even know if he has flight hours?" Another barked. "Real ones, not parades and simulators?" A third leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "He's bluffing. He's provoking us, testing how much we believe our own superiority." Across the room, General Laveau stood apart, arms behind his back, silent until now. His face was lined like old leather, the kind that had been through more wars than briefings. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the noise with gravel and finality. "Let him fly." Heads turned. "Excuse me?" an advisor asked, incredulous. Laveau's gaze didn't waver. "Let him fly. Let him fail. Let the world see the reality beneath the uniform." "Are you serious?" one of the civilian aides snapped. "This could spark a diplomatic scandal." Laveau shrugged once. "Or it could settle one. He wants our respect. Let's see if he earns it. You all laughed when he said he could fly. So give him the sky. Let's find out if his words are wind or wings." The room quieted. Even the pen tapping stopped. Putin had been listening the entire time, unmoving at the head of the table, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. He watched the debate without interruption, letting the air grow heavy with uncertainty. The silence that followed Laveau's words wasn't agreement. It was calculation. Finally, slowly, Putin sat back in his chair and looked toward the far wall, where a live camera feed of the airstrip flickered silently. The jet was still there, cold and magnificent under the soft morning light. And standing beside it, alone, was Ibrahim. He looked small from this distance, almost insignificant against the vast expanse of runway. And yet, something in the way he stood, arms at ease, gaze forward, made the others in the room shift uncomfortably. Putin spoke without turning his head. "Give him a co-pilot," he said quietly. "Back up only. He flies from the left seat." "But he asked for the real," Putin interrupted. "Let him have it. Let the world watch." His voice was low but final, the kind of tone that didn't leave room for further protest. General Laveau nodded once and turned to leave. The others hesitated, glancing at one another, the weight of a decision made hanging in the air like storm clouds. They had offered him the illusion. He had demanded the truth. Now they were going to give it to him, and wait for the sky to decide who would walk away with their pride intact. The hangar doors yawned open like a metallic amphitheater, spilling dawn's cold light across polished concrete and the hunger-colored fuselage of the Sukhoi 35. Spotlights tracked along its spine, revealing beads of condensation that clung to the titanium skin. A cluster of technicians in quilted jackets gathered at a safe distance, their breath rising in pale ribbons, while they whispered predictions as casually as gamblers at a racetrack. In a corner office, Ibrahim Traoré unbuttoned his coat and accepted the flight gear presented to him, a regulation Russian suit in drab olive. He lifted it by the shoulders and saw immediately what they intended. The torso hung 2 inches too long, the sleeves swallowed his wrists, the legs puddled over his boots. A subtle insult, carefully measured. If he complained, he looked insecure. If he tolerated it, he looked ridiculous. Without comment, he stepped into the suit, cinched the waist, and rolled the cuffs with quick, practiced motions. Confidence, he had learned, was not in the cut of the fabric, but in the posture of the man inside it. A young crewman, barely 20, cheeks flushed from the cold, approached with a helmet and gloves. He avoided Ibrahim's eyes and muttered in Russian to an older mechanic, "10 000, он даже не взлетит." 10,000, he won't even lift off. Механик хихикнул и ответил. 50. Он разобьет самолет. 50,000, he'll wreck the plane. Their conviction floated just loud enough to be heard, deliberately, like breadcrumbs of contempt. Ibrahim adjusted the helmet's chin strap and nodded a silent thank you that neither man returned. Then he crossed the busy floor toward the jet, boots tapping a deliberate cadence that cut through the murmured wagers and the whir of portable generators. Each step felt like walking a line drawn between two futures, one written for him, the other he was about to author himself. Major Alexei Vonsky waited at the boarding ladder, visor up, expression unreadable. A veteran test pilot with 5,000 logged hours and a chest full of commendations, Vonsky had been assigned as safety co-pilot, though everyone in the hangar understood the subtext: chaperone, insurance policy, witness to failure. As Ibrahim reached the foot of the ladder, Vonsky raised a gloved hand. "Protocol dictates I perform the takeoff and landing," he said in crisp English. "You may handle controlled maneuvers once we're airborne." Ibrahim met his gaze, noting the polite mask and the tight muscle in the pilot's jaw. "That won't be necessary, Major," he replied, voice even. "I fly from wheels up to wheels down." Vonsky opened his mouth to protest, then caught sight of General Lavau observing from a mezzanine above, arms folded. Whatever order the general had issued earlier, it overruled normal procedure. Vonsky swallowed, nodded once, and stepped aside on the narrow ladder. Climbing into the cockpit, Ibrahim felt the aircraft embrace him with a hum like distant thunder. He settled into the left seat. The cushion was set for a taller frame, so he adjusted the rudder pedals inward, hands moving with unhurried precision. Overhead, a chorus of switches awaited arming sequences, each knurled knob and guarded toggle familiar despite the foreign labels. He traced the startup checklist in memory, lips barely moving. Below, the technicians watched with growing unease as he initialized systems without assistance. INS alignment, hydraulic pressure, avionics bus, flawless. One whispered, "Ktoigo chill." Who taught him? Another responded with a shrug that felt like the beginning of doubt. Vonsky slid into the right seat, helmet snapping against the headrest. "If you deviate from tower instructions," he warned softly, "I take the stick." "You'll have nothing to worry about," Ibrahim answered, eyes on the MFDs cycling to life. He keyed the intercom. "Ground, Burkina 1 requesting clearance for engine start." The phrase, Burkina 1, crackled through the hangar like a challenge stamped onto Russian airwaves. Tower control granted permission, voice clipped, and fuel pumps began their mechanical whine. Turbines spooled, first a low growl, then a rising scream that vibrated through the composite frame into Ibrahim's ribs. He felt the jet awaken under him, more responsive than any machine he had ever flown, like a caged predator sensing unlocked gates. On the mezzanine, Lavau leaned toward Putin, whose expression remained carved from granite. "The suit's too big," the general muttered, "but it seems to fit him anyway." Putin said nothing. His eyes stayed on the cockpit canopy as it lowered and sealed with a pneumatic hiss, closing Ibrahim inside a glass cocoon of thrust-ready power. Below, the bets hushed. The gamblers realized the wheel was already spinning, the ball clattering toward an outcome none of them had truly prepared to witness. Ibrahim wrapped his fingers around the hawdahs, glanced once at the sky beyond the wide doors, and whispered, a promise to no one but himself. "Let them measure me now." Ground control signaled taxi clearance. The Sukhoi began to roll. The Sukhoi 35 taxied onto the runway, with the smooth, predatory grace of something too powerful to bother announcing itself. The sun was still low, casting long shadows across the tarmac, slicing through the morning fog like silent warnings. From the control tower, voices crackled through the comms in curt, measured Russian, cold syllables with the sharp edge of restraint, as if every word had been weighed against risk and reluctantly released. "Burkina 1, the tower intoned in accented English. "You are cleared for takeoff, runway 36 left, ceiling 10,000 meters, no urban overflight, flight duration limited to 30 minutes. Confirm." Ibrahim pressed the comm switch with steady fingers. "Burkina 1, understood. Confirming takeoff clearance, runway 36 left, 30-minute window acknowledged." The cold acknowledgement from the tower ended with a final pause, almost like they were waiting for someone else to override the decision, but no one did. Above them, inside the viewing chamber, Putin stood with his hands behind his back, flanked by military brass and silent advisors. His eyes followed the jet's every move. He said nothing, but the muscles in his jaw were taut, his expression unreadable. In the cockpit, Major Vonsky sat rigid, gloved hands folded loosely over his lap, eyes fixed forward, but glancing sideways. He cleared his throat, tone controlled but firm. Just to repeat, I'm designated for takeoff and landing. I'll handle throttle until we're at altitude. Ibrahim didn't respond immediately. Instead, he brought the brakes to a soft stop at the runway threshold, engines rumbling beneath him like a coiled storm. His eyes scanned the HUD, then the horizon. Then, without turning, he spoke. That won't be necessary, Major. Vonsky's brow furrowed. Sir, with respect, this isn't protocol. Ibrahim adjusted the throttle slightly, letting the engine purr higher. Then, with calm finality, neither is what's about to happen. For a moment, nothing moved. The engines vibrated beneath them, waiting. So did Vonsky. He looked over, trying to read Ibrahim's face beneath the helmet and visor. What he saw wasn't overconfidence or ego, but something more unsettling. Certainty. The kind of certainty no simulator could teach. Vonsky hesitated, then leaned back into his seat. You have the stick, he said, the faintest note of curiosity replacing resistance. He hit the intercom and announced to tower, Sukhoi 35 ready for departure. Pilot in command. President Traoré. On the ground, technicians froze mid-step. A junior officer dropped his clipboard. In the viewing chamber, Lavu raised an eyebrow. Putin's lips parted, just slightly, not to speak, but perhaps to breathe through whatever realization was starting to form. The HUD flickered green across Ibrahim's visor. A final systems check blinked complete. Flaps configured. Weapon systems locked in safe mode. The runway stretched ahead like a corridor into history. Throttle up, Ibrahim whispered. He pressed forward and the Sukhoi responded instantly. Acceleration snapped through the fuselage, wheels hissing, turbine scream peaking. The world outside blurred at the edges as G-force pressed them both into their seats. The jet surged down the strip like a predator breaking its chain. And then, in one clean breath, it lifted off. They were airborne. Vonsky glanced at the altimeter, rising fast, then at the horizon line that dipped away beneath them. He said nothing. Beside him, Ibrahim's hands were relaxed, fluid across the controls. No second guessing, no hesitation. He was flying the Sukhoi like it had waited for him. The tower crackled again. Burkina 1, climb to 5,000 meters. Proceed on assigned heading. Repeat, stay within designated corridor. Ibrahim responded calmly. Wilco. Altitude 5,000. But his eyes stayed fixed on the sky above that. Vonsky finally broke the silence. You've done this before. Yes, Ibrahim replied, adjusting trim. Just never in front of an audience. From the Kremlin to the runway, eyes followed their ascent. And no one, not even those who had set the trap, knew anymore whether they were watching the beginning of a flight or the end of a long-held illusion. The Sukhoi sliced through the low cloud layer with a whisper-sharp precision that belied its size. The takeoff had been textbook. No wobble, no hesitation, no overcorrection. Smooth, fast, confident. From the tower, the jet looked less like a machine and more like a thought-given form, climbing with the certainty of a bird that had never considered falling. On the ground, something subtle but unmistakable began to shift. The cluster of engineers and officers that had once gathered like spectators at a show now stood stiffer, quieter. Arms folded, glances exchanged. What had begun as amusement had morphed into something closer to curiosity, and from curiosity, unease. Burkina 1 now passing 2,000 meters, the control officer announced, eyes locked to the radar screen. Inside the viewing chamber, the silence grew louder. General Laval leaned slightly forward. He wasn't smiling anymore. The younger colonel beside him muttered, His roll rate, it's clean. Too clean. Putin remained still, but his hands were no longer behind his back. One rested flat on the glass, eyes narrowing as the Sukhoi's vapor trail carved an unbroken line across the gray morning sky. At 4,000 meters, the first maneuver came. A rapid climb, nose up to 70 degrees, Sharper than the standard protocol, a move that tested both machine and man. The Sukhoi responded like a violin tuned to the perfect pitch. No shudder, no stall. A fluid motion drawn with invisible ink against the sky. Then the barrel roll, not once, twice. The aircraft twisted along its axis, rotating in a full 360 degrees before straightening out as if the sky itself had asked for a signature. In the co-pilot's seat, Major Vonsky said nothing. He had expected nerves, stiff motions, overcorrections. What he saw instead was fluency. Ibrahim moved as if he didn't just understand the aircraft. He anticipated it, guided it, as if the jet was not being flown, but expressed. "He flies like one of ours," a voice murmured in the hangar below. It wasn't clear who said it, but several turned to look. The control tower radioed again, tone more clipped this time. "Burkina 1, maintain heading, confirm altitude limits. Repeat, no vertical maneuvers beyond assigned ceiling." Ibrahim acknowledged the instruction with calm professionalism. "Roger, holding at 5,000. But his hands didn't slow. The next turn was sharper, angled, deliberate. A tight curve that kissed the edge of the approved corridor. The Sukhoi held perfectly, wings level, throttle feathered just enough to test, but not break, the boundaries they'd given him. In the control room, an Air Force colonel leaned over to Laveau. "If he keeps this up, the optics flip," he whispered. "We're not watching him anymore. He's making us watch ourselves." Laveau said nothing, but his eyes followed the jet without blinking. In the cockpit, Ibrahim adjusted trim slightly and let the nose tip into a shallow descent, then arced upward again in a graceful sweep. Not showing off. Not yet. Just breathing in a language few were fluent in. Below, across Russia's hardened concrete and cold sky, a question now echoed in the minds of everyone watching. Who taught him to fly like this? And more importantly, what else had they underestimated? The Sukhoi banked left, soaring higher, the hum of its engines now more than just power. It was intent. The sky, once indifferent, had begun to listen. At 8,000 meters, the world below had receded into an abstract canvas of shapes and shadows. The horizon curved subtly now, a reminder that the earth itself had begun to reveal its limits, though Ibrahim Traoré showed no sign of respecting them. The Sukhoi 35 climbed with the smooth inevitability of something unbound by permission. The air had thinned, the sky deepened into a bruised indigo, and still he flew, not recklessly, but with the quiet precision of someone executing a plan long carried in silence. In the command center, the room was still. Radar operators had stopped fidgeting. Aides no longer whispered. The laughter that had once bounced easily off the walls had vanished completely. All eyes were fixed on a series of screens that tracked the jet's altitude, pitch, and trajectory. Then came the first curve. It wasn't steep or sudden, just a gentle leftward arc, the kind that would pass for routine, if not for what followed. Without changing velocity, Ibrahim tilted the Sukhoi into a mirrored rightward motion. The maneuver traced a fluid loop in the air, and as the vapor trails lingered against the cold sky, a shape began to emerge. Graceful, balanced, unmistakable. An infinity symbol. Two perfect symmetrical loops etched in white vapor, floating above Russian airspace like a whisper from something eternal. It wasn't random. It wasn't decorative. It was deliberate. In the viewing chamber, someone gasped softly. At the glass window, President Putin stood motionless, his eyes locked on the twin loops forming above his capital. His knuckles had whitened around the edge of the observation table, but his face remained neutral, barely. Behind him, an aide took a hesitant step forward. "Should we radio him?" he asked. Putin didn't respond. General Laveau exhaled slowly and muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "He's not showing off. He's sending a message." A low murmur rippled through the group, but no one moved. No one dared interrupt the sky. Down on the tarmac, technicians looked up through frost-rimmed goggles, mouths slightly open, expressions twisted between confusion and awe. One of the engineers who had bet against Ibrahim the day before dropped his coffee without realizing it. The cup shattered on the concrete, unnoticed. Inside the cockpit, Ibrahim was calm. The Sukhoi obeyed like an extension of his will, every correction slight, every motion smooth. He wasn't fighting the jet. He was conversing with it. The loops held their shape, suspended against the heavens like a symbol carved from silence. In the co-pilot's seat, Major Vonsky finally spoke. His voice was lower now, no longer formal. "You planned this?" Ibrahim kept his gaze ahead, fingertips resting lightly on the throttle. "No," he said. "I remembered it." Vonsky glanced sideways. "Remembered from what?" "From every time I was told I couldn't," Ibrahim replied. "Every time the world offered the illusion instead of the real thing. I remembered what it felt like to be measured and dismissed. And I remembered how infinity works, always returning, always evolving." The radio crackled. "Burkina 1, adjust heading immediately. You are deviating from assigned flight path." Ibrahim acknowledged. "Copy." But he didn't turn. Not yet. In the command center, a young flight analyst looked up from her terminal and said softly, "It's too precise to be for fun." Another leaned over. "It's art." "No," the first replied. "It's statement." The loops remained suspended above Moscow, perfect and unbroken. Putin finally turned from the window. He could have done a victory roll, could have buzzed the tower, but he didn't. Lavaux nodded. "Because this wasn't about us." Putin looked at him, eyebrows raised. "This is about them," Lavaux said. "Everyone watching who never had a sky to write in." A new silence filled the room, one made not of tension, but realization. Not fear, but the weight of something shifting, just slightly but irreversibly. Above them, the infinity symbol began to thin with the wind, but its shape had been made. Its presence had been felt. Ibrahim gently pulled the Sukhoi into a steady climb again, angling now toward open air, leaving behind not just vapor, but doubt. The kind that unsettles not with noise, but with elegance. On the ground, no one moved. They didn't need to. The sky had already spoken. The Sukhoi 35 climbed past its authorized ceiling with effortless grace, slipping through 10,000 meters as if airspace limits were merely suggestions. The engines responded with deep, clean thrust, vibrating through the cockpit like the rhythm of something ancient. Deliberate, undeniable, sovereign. Outside, the sky darkened into a richer blue, the curvature of the Earth revealing itself along the distant edge of the horizon. In the control center, alarms blinked, but no one moved. Analysts stared at screens. Vectors flashed red. Ibrahim was now 2,000 meters above his assigned ceiling. Protocol dictated intervention. The tower buzzed again. "Burkina 1, descend to approved altitude. Repeat, you are in violation of restricted flight parameters." The response came, crisp and calm. "Acknowledged." But the Sukhoi did not descend. It banked gently, its vapor trails arcing wide across the Moscow sky. This time the shape he drew was not abstract. No symmetry for its own sake. With a precision no simulator could simulate, Ibrahim began a series of intricate maneuvers. Each arc, each dive, each turn executed with mathematical elegance. The trails formed a distinct pattern, one so large it took ground control a full minute to realize what they were seeing. A continent. Africa. Perfectly outlined above the Kremlin skyline. One analyst gasped aloud. "He's drawing something. Wait, that's..." "It's the map," someone else said. "It's the shape of Africa." The room fell into chaos. Screens zoomed in. Coordinates were calculated. A chorus of overlapping voices erupted. "Altitude breach. Trajectory off course. Intercept? Optics disaster. This goes live and we look unprepared." A young officer stood half frozen, headphones slipping. "Sir, he's broadcasting a symbol directly over Moscow." "Is this a threat?" a political aide demanded. "We let him do this in the message." Putin raised a hand, silencing the room instantly. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes remained fixed on the screen where the jet curved gracefully into the final stroke of the continent's southern edge. "No," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "Let's see where this goes." The statement stunned the room more than the jet's path. A general leaned forward. "Sir, this is unauthorized air choreography above our capital." Putin's jaw tightened slightly. "Exactly, unauthorized, yet fully controlled, precise, intentional." He turned slightly toward Lavaux. This was not improvisation. Lavaux's mouth pressed into a hard line. No, sir. This was prepared, practiced, internalized. The image of Africa, drawn not with ink, not on paper, but in vapor and altitude, hung above Moscow like a whisper that had finally found voice. In the cockpit, Vonsky sat in silence, his earlier skepticism dissolved into stunned admiration. He watched Ibrahim draw each line not like a stuntman, but like a surgeon, each movement exact, each choice calculated. Finally, he asked, barely audible over the hum of instruments, "Where did you learn to do this?" Ibrahim didn't look away from the horizon. "From those who thought I wasn't learning," he said. "They spoke freely in front of us, trained next to us, dismissed us while we listened." He brought the Sukhoi into a soft turn, closing the shape. "Arrogance makes the best teachers, because it forgets to guard its lessons." Below, crowds in the streets had begun to notice. Civilians craned their necks. Phones came out. Live streams began. The symbol in the sky, massive and drifting, became impossible to ignore. Newsrooms scrambled. Headlines drafted themselves. Commentators fumbled for context. Was this protest? Performance? Power? But no explanation came. Only a shape, high above, drawn by the very hands they didn't expect to hold the pen. Putin's gaze remained locked on the screen. No expression, only thought. For the first time, he wasn't observing a guest or entertaining a gesture. He was witnessing a message sent not to him, but through him, to a watching world. And it came not through noise, but mastery. Through flight, not fury. The shape of a continent that had long been seen from below, now floating above one of the most guarded skies in the world. Unapologetic, unmissable, unforgettable. The cockpit hummed with the steady rhythm of controlled flight. The Sukhoi gliding through high-altitude winds with the composure of a hawk that had always known its wings. The vapor trails of Africa's outline slowly thinned behind them, dissolving into sky, but their presence lingered like smoke after a fire. Inside, the air between the two pilots had changed. The silence was no longer tense. It was reverent. Major Vonsky, eyes still on the HUD, finally spoke. His voice had lost its edge. It was no longer the voice of a test pilot correcting a guest. It was the voice of a man who had just witnessed something that defied category. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, almost to himself. Ibrahim didn't answer right away. His hands moved across the controls with unconscious familiarity, adjusting trim, feathering the throttle, shifting altitude by the slightest margins. Then, without turning, he replied, "From those who never believed we could," he said. "That was their mistake." Vonsky looked at him, searching for sarcasm or bravado. He found neither. Ibrahim continued, tone calm and measured. "We built our first simulators from scavenged parts, broken processors, discarded screens, a joystick wired to a rusted frame. We had no manuals. We reverse-engineered everything from footage and scraps." His voice didn't rise, didn't dramatize. He wasn't telling a story to impress. He was telling it because it was true. "In Algeria, I watched Air Force instructors run drills for their own pilots. They assumed we were only observers. But we watched everything. And when they left for the night, we stayed behind, ran their flight paths again and again on makeshift rigs, powered by generators that stalled every 2 hours." The cockpit seemed to darken as his memory deepened. "There was an old hangar outside Ouagadougou," he added. "Roof caved in. The floor was sand and cement. That's where we practiced emergency landing protocols. We trained on rusted shells, pretended hydraulics, used chalk to trace cockpit layouts on plywood. If we didn't have it, we imagined it." Outside, the blue of the sky pressed against the glass, endless and silent. "They taught us without meaning to," Ibrahim said, "because they didn't think we were learning. Arrogance is generous like that. It teaches when it thinks no one is watching." Vonsky was quiet. No retort came. The sound of oxygen cycling and the faint hiss of altitude filled the space between them. Ibrahim added, almost gently, "Most of my hours aren't logged, because no one thought to log them. We weren't supposed to have them." A beat passed, then another. A memory flashed, unspoken but present. A group of young African cadets in a dim warehouse, one projector flickering on a stained wall, voices whispering through headset static. No instructors, no permission, Just the sound of flight imagined so vividly that, in time, it became real. Another flash. An old French training craft wheezing to life, wings patched with mismatched aluminum, lifting into humid sky while three young men on the ground traced every movement in the dirt with their fingers. Back in the present, Vonsky shifted in his seat, no longer a monitor, now a witness. "You trained with ghosts," he said softly. Ibrahim nodded. "And now we haunt the sky." They flew on, two men from different worlds, suspended in the same air, one finally understanding that mastery can come from places the world forgets to look, and that history, when rewritten, doesn't ask for permission. It takes flight. The sky welcomed his descent with the same eerie stillness it had offered his climb. No resistance, no turbulence. The Sukhoi 35 glided downward with quiet control, as if reluctant to return to the ground after having touched something larger than the physical world. The vapor trails were gone now, swallowed by wind and altitude, but their impression remained etched in memory. In the minds of those who had watched it unfold in real time, eyes wide, jaws clenched, unable to look away. Ibrahim's hands remained steady on the controls. He eased the jet's nose downward, his fingers brushing over the switches in a familiar sequence, his breathing even, his posture upright. He flew not like a man performing a feat, but like someone completing a thought. There was no need for dramatic roles, no flourish for the cameras. He had already spoken the loudest language possible. Now he simply returned. The tarmac stretched out below like a concrete promise. The control tower, silent for minutes, finally crackled to life again. "Burkina 1, you are cleared to land. Runway 36. Winds calm. Welcome back." The words felt more respectful this time, less automated, almost reverent. With practiced precision, Ibrahim lowered the landing gear and brought the Sukhoi gently toward the earth. The touchdown was so smooth that those watching from the ground barely realized it had happened. The rear wheels kissed the runway first, followed by the nose, the jet rolling to a stop with a low growl that echoed across the airfield like the final note of a symphony. For a moment, everything stood still. Then the canopy lifted and the cold wind returned, biting, sharp, but strangely invigorating. Ibrahim removed his helmet slowly, revealing a face untouched by a strain or sweat. His eyes scanned the horizon, but not in search of validation. He was grounding himself, checking his coordinates. Not on a map, but in history. He stepped down from the jet, boots hitting the metal ladder with calm finality. On the tarmac, technicians and military staff had gathered, more now than before. News had spread. The infinity symbol had gone viral, the image already circulating across devices and networks faster than the Kremlin could control it. They weren't just watching a landing. They were watching a shift. The wind whipped his coat as he began the walk across the runway, each step measured but unhurried. The murmurs quieted. Even the cameras, those that had been allowed, remained respectfully still, as though instinctively aware this was not a moment to interrupt with commentary. At the far end of the tarmac stood Putin, arms behind his back, coat flaring slightly in the wind, flanked by aides who had no words left. Ibrahim approached until there was only a breath's distance between them. Putin's expression was unreadable, but his eyes had changed. The glint of amusement, of subtle condescension that had lit them hours earlier, was gone, replaced now by something far rarer, recalibration. They stood like that for several seconds. Two men, once separated by assumption, now joined by demonstration. Then Putin extended his hand. "Perhaps I misjudged you," he said, the words quiet, almost private. Ibrahim met his gaze evenly as he took the hand. The shake was firm. It lingered longer than ceremony allowed. "Perhaps you did," Ibrahim replied. Behind them, the crowd was still. Even Laveau, once smug and certain, now watched with the cautious respect of a man who had seen something rewrite the rules he thought were unbreakable. Ibrahim stepped back. The air felt heavier now, not with tension, but with meaning. Putin gestured slightly toward the main building. "We should continue this conversation inside," he said. "I believe our agenda has expanded." Ibrahim nodded once. "I'd like that." And together they turned toward the Kremlin. No sirens, no press conference, no announcement. Just the quiet understanding that something had changed, and once witnessed could not be unseen. The sky had spoken. Now the ground would listen. The room they entered was not the ceremonial hall prepared for photo ops and polite platitudes. This one was deeper inside the Kremlin, past layers of marble corridors and locked doors. It hadn't been on the original itinerary. There were no flags, no golden chairs, no engraved pens waiting to sign pre-drafted agreements. Just a long, polished table, a digital map screen, and the weight of unscheduled possibility. Putin entered first, his stride more deliberate now, as if each step acknowledged the shift that had occurred outside. Ibrahim followed with calm resolve, his coat draped over one arm, his posture unbent. He did not look like a guest. He looked like a man who had finally arrived at the table he was never expected to reach. Only a handful of people were allowed in: Putin's closest advisors, General Lavu, 2 economic ministers, and a young interpreter who barely breathed. Ibrahim was accompanied only by 1 aide and a silent intelligence attaché from Burkina Faso, whose eyes darted constantly but never interrupted. A moment of quiet settled over the table before Putin broke it. "Well, Mr. President," he said, voice low but sincere, "I assume you did not fly thousands of kilometers and loop my skies for sightseeing." Ibrahim smiled faintly, not mockingly, but with the confidence of someone whose message had been clearly received. "No," he replied, "I came for clarity." The table lit up with satellite images and geological surveys. A Kremlin economic advisor began a stiff presentation about mineral reserves in Burkina Faso, particularly rare earth metals. It was clear Russia had done its research. They had always seen the country as a resource, a bargaining chip. But they had not expected to present these slides under new terms. Ibrahim listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When the advisor finished, there was a pause. Everyone looked to Putin. He in turn looked to Ibrahim. "What does your government seek in return for access?" Putin asked. Ibrahim leaned forward, folding his hands. "We seek equality," he said. "Not charity, not conditional investment dressed as generosity, not military hardware that arrives with invisible strings and unspoken debts." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "We know the worth of our minerals, but we also know the cost of poor partnerships. Too many nations have come to our soil not to build, but to extract. We won't trade away one form of dependency for another." One of the Russian advisors shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. Lavu glanced at Putin, who showed no reaction, but listened intently. Ibrahim continued. "Infrastructure, yes. Education exchanges, technical cooperation, scientific research. We welcome that. But on our terms. Joint oversight, local labor, technology transfer. No traps disguised as development." The interpreter paused, unsure whether to translate the phrase, "traps disguised as development." Ibrahim looked at him and gently repeated, "Translate it exactly." He did. The room absorbed it in silence. Putin finally spoke. "You drive a hard bargain, President Traoré." "No," Ibrahim replied. "I drive a fair one." Another pause. Then Putin leaned back slightly thoughtful. "You know, I've had leaders come in here begging for help, pleading for recognition. This is the first time one has come to remind me we're equals." "I didn't come to be recognized," Ibrahim said. "I came to be respected." It wasn't a challenge. It was a truth. One that didn't need raising voices or threats to carry weight. The meeting shifted after that. Maps were pulled up. Economic proposals were rewritten. Military advisors suggested revised terms for training and hardware procurement. Every now and then, Putin glanced at Ibrahim, not as a regional figurehead, but as a peer. The kind who had not only stepped into the room on his own power, but had flown straight into the Russian sky and left it marked. Outside the Kremlin, the story was already spreading. Inside, the future was being redrafted, quietly, seriously, and for the first time, without assumptions. The negotiation table now looked nothing like the one that had been quietly prepared the night before. The maps were no longer symbolic. They were operational. Proposals were rewritten mid-sentence, clauses deleted, rewritten again. The mood had shifted from polite choreography to realpolitik with a sharpened conscience. What had begun as formality was now foundation building. Still, resistance lingered in some corners of the room. Old instincts didn't die easily. The Russian Minister of Defense, an aging man wrapped in medals, doctrine, and unspoken disdain, leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice heavy with years of command. "Mr. President," he said, his tone carefully respectful but edged with warning, "diplomacy isn't aerobatics. The sky may dazzle, but deals are made on the ground." Ibrahim didn't flinch. He met the man's eyes and replied calmly, "No, diplomacy isn't aerobatics." He paused. "But neither are Africa's limits written in the sky." The room fell still. The minister leaned back slowly. That line would stay with him, not as rhetoric, but as correction. Ibrahim continued, turning now to address everyone at once. "For decades, Africa has entered rooms like this with caps in hand, ready to accept whatever was offered, grateful just to be invited. But we've built our own runways now. We don't ask permission to take off." One of Putin's economic advisors frowned slightly. "And if the terms are too ambitious?" "What then?" "They're only ambitious," Ibrahim replied, "to those not used to seeing us set them." The interpreter barely kept pace, his voice trembling slightly as he translated. But no one interrupted. No one laughed, because no one doubted he had earned the right to say it. The remainder of the session moved quickly. Terms for mining rights were revised to include environmental oversight and profit sharing with local communities. Educational exchange programs were expanded, including aerospace training in Ouagadougou. Joint military exercises were agreed upon, but this time with equal command input. Infrastructure loans, once a tangle of quiet exploitation, were converted into investment partnerships with public transparency clauses. By now, Putin had said little. He didn't need to. His silence wasn't disapproval, it was calculation. He wasn't resisting the shift. He was adjusting to it. When all was said and done, he closed the folder in front of him with deliberate care. His eyes scanned the table before landing once again on Ibrahim. "Dignity," he said, his voice low, almost thoughtful, "is expensive." He let the words sit there a moment. "But pride," he added, "costs more." Ibrahim nodded once. "Then let's not pay the price for either. Let's invest in respect." Putin gave the faintest smile, and something between the two men settled. It wasn't alliance yet, but it was understanding. As the room began to empty, aides gathering documents and whispering into phones, General Laveau remained seated for a beat longer. His eyes lingered on Ibrahim, not in judgment, but in something closer to wonder. He finally stood and walked past him, pausing just long enough to mutter under his breath, "Infinity isn't just a symbol, is it?" "No," Ibrahim replied. "It's a direction." He walked out of the room not as a man who had won a negotiation, but as a man who had rewritten how it would be remembered. It began as a whisper, a blurry clip captured from the edge of the runway, posted by someone who hadn't even meant to film history, just spectacle. Then came another video, higher quality, from a security camera feed that somehow made its way online. Then came a drone's eye view, leaked from a military technician's phone, followed by frame-by-frame breakdowns from aviation forums. By the time the footage hit mainstream platforms, it had already exploded through underground networks, group chats, and encrypted links. Within hours, the world was watching. From the crowded markets of Lagos to neon-lit cafes in London, from lecture halls in Cape Town to university dorms in Chicago, people clicked, watched, rewound, and whispered the same stunned question. "He did what?" The video showed the impossible, an African president, not just flying a Sukhoi 35, but mastering it, climbing, rolling, spinning the machine in ways only seasoned combat pilots dared attempt. And then the camera tilted up, catching it in full, the vapor trails slowly forming the infinity symbol over Moscow's skies. No words, just jet and sky and silence. And yet the message thundered across continents. Comment sections ignited. Was that really him? How is this even allowed? Did he just draw Africa above the Kremlin? This isn't a flight. This is a statement. Some debated the flight credentials, some questioned the footage's authenticity, but most didn't care. The symbolism had already escaped containment. The infinity symbol became more than just a stunt. It became a rallying cry. In Johannesburg, graffiti artists repainted alleyways overnight, soaring jet trails looping into the symbol, with the words, "We have no limits." In Accra, students scribbled it on the backs of notebooks and exam papers, and lecturers began referring to the Traoré principle during classes. In Paris, African diaspora communities organized viewings, not of a film, but of the leaked footage itself, projected onto walls like art. Tattoo parlors from Abidjan to Montreal reported a sudden uptick in customers requesting the same minimalist design, infinity. No explanation needed. In Nairobi, a teenage girl posted a short video of herself holding a model plane made from cardboard, standing in front of her home's tin roof. "If he can fly over Russia," she said, "I can reach anywhere." The post had 10 million views in 2 days. Even in more official spaces, things began to shift. A commentator on a late-night U.S. political show, once known for mocking African leaders, now paused mid-rant, visibly stunned. "I don't know what's more terrifying," he said, "that he flew that jet, or that we didn't see him coming." He meant it as a joke, but it wasn't funny. What Ibrahim had done in the sky could not be contained in a single country, nor could it be reduced to a diplomatic stunt. It had escaped, into minds, onto walls, into imagination. A story retold again and again, not because it was flashy, but because it flipped the script. It was no longer about what he did. It was about what others thought he couldn't do, and how wrong they had been. The video didn't just go viral, it detonated. But while the public reaction came with hashtags and tears, what followed in the halls of power was far quieter and far more consequential. In a high-rise overlooking Washington, D.C., a senior IMF official scrolled through the footage with a furrowed brow. His assistant stood nearby, waiting. Finally, the official exhaled sharply and muttered, "We may need to revisit the loan terms for West Africa. The optics have shifted." Across town, a meeting room inside the World Bank buzzed with similar urgency. Charts and economic forecasts suddenly felt outdated. A previously rejected infrastructure proposal from Burkina Faso, considered too bold just a month ago, was now back on the agenda, underlined in red. Someone at the table spoke what others were already thinking. "We can't keep treating them like background players. They're rewriting the rules." Thousands of miles away, inside a Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing, analysts and diplomats reviewed African engagement strategies with fresh scrutiny. One strategist tapped the screen, pausing on the image of the infinity symbol etched in vapor above Moscow. "If Russia lost narrative control on their own airstrip," she said, "we should assume no one is safe from perception shocks." Burkina Faso just became a wild card with leverage. European capitals felt it too. In Berlin, a defense procurement team reviewed all ongoing negotiations with Sahel nations. In Paris, an energy conglomerate held a late-night meeting, urgently discussing whether to reopen a deal that Burkina Faso had walked away from. "We need to reframe our offer," one executive said, and this time, not from a position of superiority, but perhaps the most striking scene played out in corporate boardrooms. Mining corporations with operations across Africa scrambled. In London, a CEO slammed his hand on the table. "This changes the entire landscape," he growled. "He didn't just fly a jet, he crashed our assumptions. We've built deals on the belief that they need us more than we need them." A silence followed. Then someone added, "Burkina Faso just changed the game." The institutions hadn't seen it coming. A symbolic act had forced a strategic reset. Respect, once a soft power concept, had become a hard currency. And now even the most powerful institutions in the world were scrambling to exchange their outdated notes. In a sunlit classroom in Dakar, a teacher paused her planned history lesson. With a click, she projected the now famous footage onto the wall. Students leaned forward in their wooden desks, eyes wide as they watched the vapor trails spiral into the sky above Moscow, forming a glowing infinity that lingered like prophecy. Silence followed. Then a small voice from the back, no older than 8, broke through the quiet. "Can we do that too?" The teacher looked at her, smiled and nodded. "Yes, and maybe more." From Kinshasa to Nairobi, classrooms followed suit. Teachers scrapped curricula for the day. Science lessons turned into discussions about flight physics. History classes morphed into explorations of colonial narratives and how they could be undone. In South Africa, a high school debate final changed its motion mid-event. "This house believes the sky is no longer the limit." In Ghana, students began forming after-school aerospace clubs called Infinity Wings. They didn't wait for approval. They just began, using plastic bottles, cardboard, scavenged electronics, and belief. In the streets, murals bloomed like wildflowers. In Lagos, one wall bore Ibrahim's silhouette framed by the outline of the African continent, his jet carving the sky behind him. Below it, a single phrase in bold paint, Burkina Infinity. It became more than a slogan. It became a movement. Online, young Africans changed profile pictures to the infinity symbol. Some began tagging their dreams with it. Hashtag Burkina Infinity beside sketches of inventions, poems, college applications, small hopes made visible. Ibrahim hadn't just flown a plane. He had landed in the hearts of a generation who saw not a president, but a mirror, showing them what was possible when you dared to defy the limits others placed upon you. 10 years have passed since Ibrahim Traoré carved the infinity symbol into the skies above Moscow. Now the world watches again as a young Burkinabe woman steps into a spacecraft, about to become the first astronaut from her country. Reporters call out, cameras flash. One asks, "What inspired you to reach this far?" She smiles, steady, and gently taps the small infinity pin on her flight suit. A president who showed us the sky was never the limit. Flashbacks cut to children in villages launching paper planes, murals of jets on old walls, and classrooms filled with dreams once dismissed as impossible. Her rocket rises, not just with fuel, but with belief, planted a decade earlier by one man who refused to be underestimated. In a quiet village far from capital cities and political stages, Ibrahim Traoré now teaches mathematics to children in a modest school. His code is plain, his gestures gentle. He speaks more of equations than diplomacy. One afternoon, a boy lingers after class. "Sir, are you proud of what you did?" Ibrahim pauses, looking out at the sky. Then he smiles, small and true. "Number, I'm grateful, because it was always possible. The world just didn't believe it." His words land with quiet weight. To these children, he is no myth, just a teacher. But to the world, his legacy is written not in monuments, but in new trajectories, traced one student at a time. A soft narration carries the final moments. Power doesn't always roar. It doesn't need gold medals, threats, or loud parades. Real power lives in restraint, in courage, in the silence that follows when you prove the world wrong. Ibrahim never needed to boast. He never chased the spotlight. But his flight, a single act of calm defiance, rewrote what many believed was fixed. And sometimes that's all it takes. A symbol traced in the sky to redraw the map of the world. In a final shot, the camera pulls back from Ibrahim's school. Chalk dust floats in the air. Children laugh outside. One draws an infinity in the dirt. He watches quietly. The story ends not with applause, but with momentum. Because once potential is unlocked, it never forgets how to fly. This story reminds us that true strength doesn't always roar. It often speaks through quiet confidence and undeniable action. When you're underestimated, you have two choices: shrink or rise. Ibrahim Traoré chose to rise, not with anger, but with skill, grace, and vision. His flight wasn't just a moment of defiance, it was a message to the world. Never accept the limits others place on you. Whatever field you're in, your quiet excellence has the power to reshape perceptions. What silent strength inside you is waiting to be seen? And when will you let it fly? If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Captain of Truth, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Captain of Truth.